The toxic landscape in Church Rock, New Mexico serves as a reminder of how the largest release of radioactive materials in U.S. history was swept under the rug, poisoning the Navajo people for generations to come. In the 1940s, the U.S. government's atomic bomb program created a boom in the domestic uranium mining industry.
Recently, vast deposits of uranium have been discovered in the Navajo Hills.
Once the federal government realized the Navajo Nation was rich in uranium, 750 mines were quickly established in the area. These mines largely employed indigenous peoples on the front lines, blasting, digging, and transporting the uranium ore. Even though it was widely known that uranium mining was linked to lung cancer and workers needed to be protected from radioactivity, the employees were not provided protective gear or ventilation. United Nuclear Corps, the company running the uranium mill in Church Rock, stored their toxic waste in a nearby tailing pond which held several hundred million gallons of radioactive sludge. As if leaving large amounts of radioactive material out in the open wasn't a dangerous enough method, the tailing pond was also built on geographically unstable land. The pond wasn't lined as company engineers had directed, meaning tailings could weaken the earthen dam. Reports revealed that company employees noticed fist-sized cracks in the dam in 1978, but supervisors declined to take action. A year later, at 5:30 a.m. on July 6, 1979, a crack gave way and the dam on the pond broke, letting out 1,100 tons of uranium tailings and 94 million gallons of wastewater into the Rio Puerco. The contaminated water traveled 50 miles down the river, forming radioactive pools along the banks. Local newspapers stated that the area was sparsely populated, thus presenting no immediate health hazard. However, local Navajo peoples were in grave danger and were not warned about the spill until days later. Until then, the Navajo and their livestock continued to drink from and bathe in the river, and young children played in the newly formed radioactive pools, unaware that the water was over 1,000 times more concentrated with radioactive material than is considered safe. The EPA and United Nuclear Corps evaded responsibility for the spill, and only 1% of the radioactive waste was cleaned up within 3 months of the spill. Over 40 years later, not much more has been done to remediate the land, and the Navajo were provided next to nothing in compensation.
Why didn't anybody do anything?
Why didn't they? That's what we asked today. I don't know. Like I said in the beginning, it was about money. It was about production.
In that day and age, there weren't requirements for any kind of reclamation. There were no requirements for monitoring environmental releases, and there certainly were no requirements for protecting the health of the people who live around there.
The lack of cleanup or aid at Church Rock was in stark comparison to the 3 Mile Island nuclear meltdown that occurred only 4 months before. Even though there was 3 times as much radioactive waste at Church Rock, only 3 Mile Island received quick and thorough cleanup, abundant financial compensation, a visit from President Carter, and heavy coverage in newspapers and history books. 3 months after the spill at Church Rock, Congress allowed the mill to restart production. Toxic discharge was once again placed into unlined tailing ponds, further contaminating groundwater. The mill ran until 1982, but contamination of the landscape didn't end then.
Radioactive rock piles still dot the area, contaminated equipment and buildings remain, and beneath the ponds used to store the mine waste, there were no liners, so toxins seeped into the ground.
The high concentration of radioactive materials at Church Rock caused a surge in disabilities and terminal illnesses in the local indigenous population that continued to plague new generations, even those born decades after the spill.
At how far each person was from the sum of all of those mines and weighted it by the surface area of the mine or waste site. That alone was predictive of kidney disease, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease.
Today, the local Navajo are still fighting their government to properly clean up the land.
We want clean water and clean air for our precious children and grandchildren so that they will have the same opportunity to once again play in the meadows and canyons of my childhood. Thank you.
The land can never be fully restored, and new uranium mining companies repopulating the area argue that the safest thing for locals to do is simply move away. But moving isn't an option for the Navajo. They have spiritual and ancestral connections to the land and nowhere else to go. Their sacred homeland has been desecrated and destroyed at the hands of the US government's violent war agenda and capitalist greed. The federal government and United Nuclear Corps' negligence and cleanup is nothing short of a genocide against the Navajo, and justice will not be served until their land is safe to inhabit once again.